Okay, good morning, everyone. On behalf of both the Department of Toxic Substances Control and the Board of Environmental Safety's Fee Subcommittee, I'd like to welcome you to our virtual fees workshop. My name is Courtney Bailey, Board Specialist with the Board of Environmental Safety, and I will be your facilitator for today's workshop. Our Board Specialist, Evelyn Nuno, will be assisting with the Q&A portion of the workshop and adding resources for us in the chat. Before we begin, I will go over a few housekeeping items. Next slide, please. Materials for this workshop are posted online on the BES website, where you can find today's presentation's slides, including helpful links about the board's authority on the fee rate setting process and fee payer resources from DTSC. For the Zoom logistics, we want to let you know that the recording of today's workshop will be posted online in the coming weeks. Your continued participation in the workshop is acknowledgement that you are being recorded. If you would like to use closed captioning, you may turn this on or off by using the More menu in your Zoom toolbar. All participants will remain muted, and only the videos in the screens will be shared from the presenters and the facilitator. To participate in today's workshop, you may submit your questions and comments using the Q&A function at any time during the workshop. You may also email us at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov, or you may raise your virtual hand during the Q&A portion of the workshop following the presentations. We will do our best to get to as many questions as time allows, but if your question does not get answered, please connect with us via email and we will respond to you directly. Please note, if you prefer to submit a question anonymously and would like a response, please email us directly so we can ensure we provide you with a response if we are not able to answer your question today. The chat function will be disabled for today's meeting and will only be used to share links and resources. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please let us know through the Q&A function. Next slide, please. If anyone experiences connectivity issues with Zoom, you can use the Zoom call-in number. The information is provided to you on the slide. It will also be provided in the chat, and it is also included on our website. Next slide, please. Today's virtual workshop is hosted by the Department of Toxic Substances Control and the Board of Environmental Safety's Fee Subcommittee. The BES Fee Subcommittee members include our Board Chair, Andrew Rakestraw, Board Member, Sushma Bhatia, and our BES support staff that includes Executive Officer, Swati Sharma, Board Counsel, Greg Forrest, Environmental Program Manager, Firdos Pramirza, Senior Staff Engineer, Linda Ocampo, Board Specialist, Courtney Bailey, and Senior Staff Scientist, Marcus Raymond. Next slide, please. We are also happy to be joined today by the DTSC financial planning team, who have been a vital resource and support throughout the entire fee rate setting process. This includes our Chief Financial Officer, Brian Brown, and Fiscal Officer, Catherine Grant. Both Brian and Catherine will be available for the Q&A portion of today's workshop, along with two additional people from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, also known as CDTFA, to assist with any procedural questions from our fee payers. Next slide. For today's workshop, we will be covering the following topics. Board Chair Andrew Rakestraw will kick things off and provide an overview of the BES fee rate setting process. DTSC will then provide an update on the state's budget May revision, including a review of the preliminary fund condition statements for each of the three fee categories. After that, Board Senior Staff Engineer Linda Ocampo will review considerations that the board may be looking at for this year's fee rate setting process. After the presentations, we will open the floor for questions from our participants. And I will now turn it over to Board Chair Andrew Rakestraw to provide an overview of the board's roles and responsibilities in the fee setting process. Chair Rakestraw, over to you.
Thank you very much, Courtney. And thank you to everyone for joining the workshop this morning. Next slide, please. So the 2021 Reform Bill for DTSC, SB 158, reformed DTSC's fee structure, including the number of fees, the rates, and the associated accounts. It also established the Board of Environmental Safety to set the fee rates. Next slide, please. So starting at the basics, there are three different fees that are collected by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration on behalf of DTSC. These fee revenues are deposited into three accounts today, and the accounts in turn fund different programs at DTSC. So just briefly walking through each of the three fees. The first fee is the environmental fee. This is for California businesses with 100 employees or more, employed in California for more than 500 hours during a calendar year. This fee goes into the Toxic Substances Control account and is due by February 28th each year. The second fee is the generation and handling fee. This is paid by all entities that generate 5 or more tons of hazardous waste per site in the prior calendar year. This fee goes into the hazardous waste control account and is due in 2 equal installments each year. And then finally, there's the facility fee, which is paid by any facility treating, storing, or disposing of hazardous waste in California that is required to have a hazardous waste facility permit issued by DTSC. That fee goes into the hazardous waste facility account, which is a sub-account of the hazardous waste control account, and similar to the generation handling fee, is paid in 2 equal installments. The reason I kind of go through the specific funds is because you'll see those referenced later on in the presentation by DTSC and Linda as well. Next slide, please. So the Board of Environmental Safety has the fiduciary responsibility to keep DTSC solvent, and that's mandated by SB 158. Because of our mandate to set fees, we work closely with DTSC's finance department to monitor the revenues that are collected to ensure that DTSC has enough funding to operate its programs. So the board sets fee rates after engaging with fee payers and other stakeholders and soliciting public comment to inform the board's decisions. That's what we're doing here today. And we want to hear your comments and concerns so that we can take these to the full board. Next slide, please. So there are several factors that the board uses to set fees. As a general matter, the board's role is to balance revenue with expenditures. So DTSC's revenue comes primarily from the fees that we're discussing here today, while DTSC's expenditure amounts, are set by the legislature. However, there are some nuances. So walking through this slide, the appropriated amounts are set by the legislature and reflect the expenditures of DTSC each fiscal year. This reflects the amount of funding that DTSC requires to run its programs. And this is, of course, a very critical number because we have to ensure that the fees collected on a yearly basis are meeting the appropriated amounts. Administrative costs, in turn, are a component of the appropriated amounts. SB 158 mandates that the fee rates be set to allow for a reserve in each account to account for unforeseen situations where there are shortfalls. SB 158 mandates that the reserve can't exceed 10% of authorized expenditures, though. The board needs to also account for any projected over or under collection of revenue from fees for the preceding year. And finally, SB 158 establishes fee rate limits for each of the three fees, and the board annually adjusts these limits to account for inflation. Next slide, please. So I'll now pass it off to Catherine and Brian. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Catherine Grant. I'm the fiscal officer here at DTSC. And with me today is Brian Brown, our chief financial officer. And we're here today to provide a summary of the May revision to the governor's proposed budget and provide preliminary condition statements based on the May revised budget as proposed. Next slide. So before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to kind of talk about the generation and handling fee and the shortfall. Specifically, in the first year of reform, DTSC identified a $40 million shortfall in the fee, where it was supposed to generate $81 million, but actually only generated about $43 million. Since that time, DTSC has conducted analysis on the cause of the shortfall and identified three preliminary factors contributing to the shortfall. One is limited data to oversee compliance, both in the data the department collects and the data collected from fee returns. So the data had not been able, prior to this evaluation, been able to be properly reconciled. In addition, there was broad, inconsistent application of exemptions, wherein fee payers would self-exempt from fees. Because there was limited data, DTSC and CDTFA also had limited oversight. So because we didn't have great data and because the exemptions were widely applied, we didn't necessarily know that during reform. And then additionally, there's just overall limited compliance with this, including non-payment and underpayment of fees. So just as a basis, about 20% of the hazardous waste generated in the state of California and subject to the generation and handling fee, there were no fees paid on it. Or because fee payers were self-exempting without oversight, generators underpaid their fees. So since this analysis was conducted, SB 156, which was a trailer language that was passed last year, made explicit some of these exemptions and also consolidated some of these exemptions. In addition, SB 156 provided the department with emergency rulemaking authority to further clarify DTSC's the statutory authority authorized under SB 156. Next slide. So DTSC has since submitted a May revised proposal. So in January of 2025, so just a few short months ago, DTSC adopted new regulations to implement the statutory changes from SB 156. In order to properly implement the regulations, DTSC is requesting $2.6 million spread between HWC and TSCA and 9 positions to implement the new regulations. And these new regulations implement 2 new processes. One, there's an exemption review process, which DTSC will conduct reviews of fee exemptions reported in EVQ to ensure, which is our electronic verification questionnaire, which nearly all handlers in the state of California are required to annually report into. So we'll conduct reviews of the fee exemptions claimed in the system to ensure that generators are accurately reporting exemptions and that the exemptions claimed are compliant with statutory and regulatory criteria. In addition, the other process will be reporting penalties. So DTSC will begin essential penalties on fee payers who do not timely or accurately report hazardous waste generation to DTSC. And these processes are critical to DTSC and CDTFA for the administration and oversight of our fees, as well as to the Board of Environmental Safety to ensure that they have the correct and accurate information to set fee rates. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of this proposal? One, it's consistent with the structure and intent of SB 158, so fee reform, and SB 156, the trailer bill language, and the emergency regulations adopted earlier this year. It also supports ongoing compliance efforts to ensure equitable distribution of cost to generators. So more complete and accurate data for CDTFA and DTSC to conduct oversight, and also more accurate information for the board's rate setting process. Also, just as a note, while not the purpose of the reporting, while not the purpose of the reporting penalties, they'll also generate additional penalty revenues for the department. But again, that's the penalties are really aimed at in getting compliance with reporting requirements, not a reliable source of revenue for the department. In addition, it will improve fee payer compliance. Um, and will increase equity among fee payers by ensuring that compliant fee payers are not covering the cost of non-compliant fee payers. And then generally, successful implementation will support continued growth to the G&H fee revenues in out years. Specifically, increased G&H fee revenue through improved compliance and less overuse of exemptions will support the payment of the loan, the repayment of the loan to the Beverage Container Fund, which DTSC received a $40 million loan for, and reduce the pressure to increase rates by as much as it would otherwise would be the case. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian to discuss draft fund condition statements with you. Brian?
Great. Thank you, Kate. Again, my name is Brian Brown. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at DTSC. If we can go to the next slide, please. And what I'm going to do over the next couple of slides is walk you through the fund condition statements for each of the three funds that receive revenues from the fees set by the board. Now, fund condition statements, that what they are really are just displays of the expected health or status of the fund over both the current fiscal year and the coming fiscal year. Just as a point of reference, we assume at this point in the process that in terms of revenues, that the current fee rates would continue next year, that there would not be a change in fee rates. That's just for starting purposes. But as you look at these fund condition statements, and they're simplified, what they do is summarize for you the estimated revenues, the expenditures, and other types of adjustments. And then based on these inputs, it shows what the projected year-end reserve or balance would be at the end of the coming fiscal year, the 2025-26 fiscal year. And this is really an important starting point for the board's fee setting process, because it shows whether the projected fund balance is going to be high enough to fully support the amount budgeted for DTSC. If you had a situation where the projected fund balance was negative in the coming year, that would imply that the board would need to increase fee rates for that particular fee in that fund. Conversely, if the reserve is projected to be higher than the 10% maximum allowed under law, in that case, the board, it would be implied that the board needs to actually reduce the fee rate in the coming year. And then, of course, in between that is the possibility that you have a positive reserve projected, but less than that 10% maximum, in which case you would expect that the board would have some discretion whether to increase, decrease, or leave the fee rate unchanged that next year. Now, before we walk through each of these fund conditions, I do want to make one additional caveat, and I'll come back to this again in a little more detail. But I do want to highlight that these are preliminary fund condition statements. These are not final, in particular because these are based on the governor's May revision. And the final budget act still needs to be negotiated and finalized between the governor and the state legislature, which should be happening over the next couple of weeks. So let's start with the fund condition that you see on your screen now. This is for the Toxic Substances Control Account, or TSCA. This fund receives environmental fee revenues. And you can see that here we have for environmental fee revenues an estimate of $125 million in both the current fiscal year, 2024-25, and in the coming fiscal year, 25-26. Again, we're assuming that for this purpose that the fee rate is unchanged. But you can also see on here we have in this fund a number of other revenues and adjustments. This includes revenues such as cost recovery revenues that we receive from responsible parties. It also, really importantly, includes an annual transfer that we make from the Toxic Substances Control account to our site remediation account to support our cleanup activities at state and federal orphan sites. You'll also see on here our estimated expenditures, and you'll see that they increased by a little over $8 million between the current year and the coming budget year. That increase is largely attributable to our current estimates of cost increases, these annual cost increases for state employee salary and benefits. So that number could change. But based on these inputs, what you'll really want to focus on is the bottom right corner of the table. And you'll see here there's a projected year-end fund balance of 13.5 million in Tosca. That's 11.2% of estimated expenditures, which is higher than the maximum reserve allowed under law of 10%. Hence, absent other changes, if this comes to pass, this would require a reduction in the environmental fee rate next year. All right, next slide, please. So next we'll turn to the hazardous waste facilities account, which receives the facility fee. Again, similar structure as the last table. You'll see we have facility fee revenues estimated. We have other revenue sources. This is primarily the permitting fee for service paid by permitted facilities, and also estimated expenditures. Now, this fund is much smaller in scale, both on the revenue and expenditure side of the ledger compared to Tosca. But what you do see again, if you look at the bottom right corner of the table, you see here a projected fund balance that exceeds 10% maximum. In this case, the estimated fund balance, based on what we know today, is $3.9 million, which is about 21% or over 21% of estimated expenditures. So again, like with the environmental fee, this would imply that the board would need to reduce the facility fee next year to bring the fund within that 10% maximum reserve. Next slide, please. All right, next we'll look at the hazardous waste control account, which receives a generation and handling fee. Now you'll see this table is a little bit more complicated than the last two. So in addition to including our projected data on revenues and expenditures, we've also included an additional row for loan repayment, which is the one highlighted in yellow. So more specifically, what we've done is we've provided three different amounts, three different scenarios of the amount to be repaid from HWCA to the beverage container revolving fund. So this again, you heard a couple times mentioned there was a $40 million loan made a couple of years ago to address that revenue shortfall that we were experiencing, and we need to start repaying that loan. We haven't repaid any of it yet. So the decision on how much to repay in the coming fiscal year is something that hasn't been decided yet, but it is going to be included in the enacted budget. But since it has not yet been decided, we wanted to provide the public and the board with a couple of scenarios to illustrate how the loan repayment amount could affect the projected fund balance in HWCA. So you can see, for example, under scenario A, which is the first of the three blue columns, a loan repayment amount of $20 million would result in a 9.2% fund balance, which is still positive, of course, and actually close to that maximum 10% limit. That would imply, under this scenario, that there would not be much room for a fee increase at all. Now, and then as you look at the next two columns, you can see successively larger repayment scenarios, $23 million and then $26 million. And as you see those increasing loan repayment amounts, what you see is then a reduction in the fund balance of a commensurate amount. So for example, if you look at the far right column, scenario C, you can see a repayment amount of $26 million, which would result in a final projected reserve of 5.1 million, which is about 4.1% of projected expenditures. So what really the key lesson here is that there's a trade-off. A larger loan repayment amount next year means reducing the future debt or liability of the fund, which is really important. Consider that the full amount that has to be repaid over the next couple of years is 40 million. But it does reduce the near-term fund balance, which then would put additional potential need for a fee increase next year. Next slide, please. So in summary, based on what we know at the time of the governor's budget at the May revision, all three of our funds are looking very healthy. Based on the data we have in hand today, There would likely need to be a decrease in both the environmental and the facility fees. And there is expected to be sufficient funds available to make a significant repayment of the loan previously made to HWCA. That said, I said it before, but I'll repeat it. These numbers are still very preliminary, and that's for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, we do not yet have a final enacted budget in place. Final budget provisions are still being negotiated between the legislature and the governor, and those provisions will provide us with our appropriation amounts for the 25-26 fiscal year. We do anticipate those decisions will be made over these next couple of weeks of June. Importantly, a final budget is going to give us some key information, of course, about our DTSC budget authority, as well as give us information about other potential statewide budget actions, such as those related to employee salary and benefit increases. In the final budget enactment, we will also get confirmation that our generation and handling fee proposal, the one that Ms. Grant spoke to, is adopted in the final budget act. And this is important both to confirm what our estimated cost will be to implement that proposal, as well as the expected revenue that we expect to gain from increased generation and handling fee compliance. Additionally, we'll have some additional changes or updates to our estimates for expenditures and revenues for the current fiscal year 24-25. These adjustments will be made over the next few weeks and months as we begin and then ultimately complete our year-end close activities. And these adjustments are really important because they'll impact our starting balance for the 25-26 fiscal year. So again, these fund condition statements I think are very important starting point for the board, but they are preliminary. But we will be making updates over the coming weeks, including updates for the July board meeting that reflects the enacted budget. So with that, we can go to the next slide and I'll turn it over to Linda.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Kate and Brian, for walking us through the May revision and the preliminary fund condition data. In this section, I'll build on what's already been shared to frame how the board will use this information to develop fee rate scenarios for fiscal year 2025-26. Next slide, please. At this stage of the process, as Brian mentioned, we have some initial information to work with, while other data points are still pending. What we have today are the preliminary fund condition statements that give us an initial picture of the fund's projected balance and reserve levels. The other key information pending is final revenue and expenditure data for fiscal year 2024-25, which will be coming after the fiscal year closes at the end of June. This data will be used to refine the fund's beginning balance for fiscal year 2025 and 26. In July, we'll receive the final appropriations for fiscal year 25-26 following the enactment of the Budget Act. These are the authorized expenditures that will inform on the fund's ending balance and reserves. And by mid-August, we'll receive the price index update, which is used to calculate the fee rate limits. Together, this information will allow the board to evaluate fee options for each fund. In the meantime, as kind of recalling what Brian just mentioned, the preliminary data already tells us a couple of important things to consider. We're seeing higher than usual reserves in all three funds due to temporary state budget adjustments, and that there is a loan repayment that will factor into the generation and handling fee rates this year. And with that, I'll go over the specific considerations for the three funds, starting with the environmental fee. Next slide. The environmental fee. Okay, as Andrew pointed earlier, environmental fee funds the Toxic Substances Control Account, or TSCA. As of now, the projected ending balance for TSCA for 2025-26 yields a level slightly above the allowed 10%. We'll continue to monitor the fee collection rate as well as any budget adjustments made in July to determine whether the fee rate decrease is required to address that slight excess in reserves. Again, this is preliminary and we'll refine our recommendations as more data becomes available. Next slide, please. Next is a facility fee, which supports the hazardous waste facility account. based on the same preliminary data, the projected ending balance yields a reserve level that significantly exceeds the 10% limit. For the board to meet the statutory reserve requirements, a fee reduction is necessary to bring the reserve down to within the 10% limit. Again, this is preliminary and we'll continue to review fee performance and any budget-related adjustments that could impact the fund. Next slide. Now let's turn to the generation and handling fee, which funds the hazardous waste control account. Right now, the account has a projected balance of about 31 million, but this figure does not account for the pending repayment of the 40 million loan from the Beverage Container Recycling Fund. This loan is currently scheduled for repayment by June 30 of 2026, with a potential extension to 2027. As Brian illustrated earlier, the different repayment amounts would affect the fund's reserve levels. Regardless of the repayment amount considered this year, additional installments will be required in the future. The board is also considering the early impacts of recent fee regulatory changes aimed at improving fee payer compliance and revenue collection. These three factors, final budget adjustments, loan repayment, and revenue collection rates, will drive the scenarios we bring forward in July. And with those considerations in mind, let's take a look at the timeline for how the rest of the fee setting process will unfold. Next, please. Here's what the next few months look like as we move towards finalizing the fiscal year 2025-26 fee rates. In June, following this workshop, we'll continue to engage with the public on the fee setting process. Then at the end of June, we'll have a better data on revenues and expenditures following Budget Act adoption. In July, once the Budget Act is enacted, DTSC will update the fund condition statements with the final appropriation amounts and any other adjustments. Also around this time, the loan repayment amount will be determined, and this information will be used to bring forward the proposed fee rate scenarios at the July board meeting. Around mid-August, we'll set the fee rate limits and incorporate them into the proposed fee rates package. And on August 27, 28, the board will vote on the proposed fee rates. After the vote, our legal counsel will begin the emergency rulemaking process to set the fee rates by October 1st as required by statute. Next, please. So what's next for the subcommittee? On July 15th, we'll return to the board and the public, this time with proposed fee rate scenarios for each of the three funds we discussed today. Briefly, the scenarios show how different fee rate options would impact fund reserve levels. This helps the board evaluate which fee rates would provide sufficient reserves to ensure fund stability in the coming year. And for stakeholders, these scenarios offer a preview of if and how fee rates might change and insight into the factors shaping those decisions. Then on August 27, 28, the board will vote on these fee rates. Both meetings will be hybrid, so please mark your calendar and plan to join us. Next, please. All right, we really appreciate you joining us today. We want you to make sure you know how to stay involved. There are a few ways to connect. First, we encourage you to attend our upcoming board meeting in July. It's open to the public and a great way to stay informed and provide input. You'll see the link to our website on the slide where we post all meeting materials and our updates. Second, if you'd like to speak directly with the fee subcommittee board members and staff, you can request a meeting by reaching out to our board specialist, Courtney Bailey. And finally, if you have feedback, questions, or suggestions you'd like to share in writing, you're welcome to submit your written comments directly to me, Linda Ocampo. Both Courtney's and my email addresses can be found in the Zoom chat feature, so please feel free to reach out to us after the workshop. And with that, I'll turn it over to Courtney, who will moderate our Q&A portion of the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you for all of our presenters today. The key word definitely is preliminary, but I appreciate folks sharing what preliminary data we do have to start the process and also the preliminary considerations that the fee subcommittee and the board will look at. So I appreciate you all taking the time to share that with us while understanding a lot of things are still to be determined. So we're going to go ahead and move to the Q&A portion of this workshop. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature that is in the Zoom function to provide your written comments or questions. We have a lot of great staff here to assist with your questions. You can also email us at bes.dtsc.ca.gov, and we'll provide that email in the chat as well. So we have about, let's see, an hour and 20 or so minutes for the Q&A portion. So we want to encourage folks to take the opportunity while we have our board chair and BES staff and our subcommittee present. We also have Brian and Catherine from DTSC present, and we are joined by Danielle and Lynn from CDTFA if there might be some more process related questions to the fee payers. So please encourage you to use the Q&A function to submit your comments. We will also take verbal comments. You can raise your virtual hand on Zoom or press *9 on your phone if you would like to make a verbal comment as well. Okay. So far, no questions yet. So again, we definitely encourage you to use this time. We know it is preliminary data. Oh, great. We got a question for Brian and Catherine by Chris Maurer. Brian and Catherine, what accounted for the significant fluctuation between last year's projected deficit of $900,000 in the hazardous waste facilities account in 25-26, absent a fee increase, and now a projected balance of $3.9 million for 25-26, following last year's increase to the facility fee rates? Specifically, the 16% fee increase that the board enacted under Scenario 1 last year was expected to raise a total of $1,825,500 to bridge the projected deficit and provide a 5% fund reserve. What accounts for the rest of the funds in the budget reserve that could conceivably have to be returned to fee payers? Thank you.
Yeah, I can address that. And really, some of the factors apply to both the facility, the fee, and the hazardous waste facilities account, but also our other two funds as well. So really, there are two things going on. One is that a positive factor, which is that for all of our fees, our revenues came in pretty strong this year. Right in line with what we had projected, but that was really important in making sure that we had sufficient revenue relative to what our needs were, what we had projected. But the other, probably even more important factor when comparing last year's estimates to this year's estimates is that folks may be aware there was included in the 24-25 budget statewide reductions, not only for DTSC, but for all state departments. And there were two different reductions that for DTSC totaled more than $30 million. So at the time that we were setting the fees last year, the board was establishing the fees, we knew that those cuts could apply to DTSC, but at the time we didn't have really good estimates. And so the actual budget reductions that were allocated to DTSC turned out to be higher than what we had assumed at the time of the board was setting the fees last year. So what that meant was that our actual authorized expenditures last year were lower than what we had projected. And those expenditure reductions, those appropriation reductions carry over to this coming fiscal year. So it actually has a compounding effect on our overall fund condition statements.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you, Chris. And we have another question that looks like kind of a tie-on to the last one from Don Kepke. So to clarify, is the DTSC BCP for 9 positions for reg development on exemptions included in the G&H fee projections and analysis? Or is that not reflected and to be included only after the budget is finalized? If not until after the budget is finalized, how is that anticipated to affect the G and H fees?
So yeah, good question. And the impact of the BCPs, both on the expenditure side and for the G&H revenues, is included in the fund condition statement for HWCA already. So it reflects the expenditures that we estimated for those 9 positions, as well as an increase in compliance rates that would increase the generation and handling fee revenue.
And an additional question to add on from Don. Also, do DTSC and the BES believe that a 10% reserve is required to be maintained? Or is it just the limit such that a smaller reserve is acceptable for the purposes of some BCRP loan repayment and avoiding fee increases?
I can answer that one. Thanks, Don. So the board does have, as you note here, discretion on how much of a reserve amount that is allowed. So SB 158 basically states that the rate shall allow for a reserve, but that reserve shall not exceed 10% of authorized expenditure level. So the board does have some discretion, and so these are some of the considerations that we will put forward in the various scenarios at the July workshop. Essentially, the various scenarios will contain various levels of or amounts of reserve. So I don't think I can speak right now for the whole board on the exact considerations. But as you point out, there is some level of discretion that the board does have, but that discretion is quite bounded.
Thank you, Chair Rakestraw. So we'll go ahead and move to Levon. Levon, we have your virtual hand raised. I'm going to invite you to unmute. Please accept our invitation and you can go ahead and ask your question to our presenters today.
Good morning. Hi. My concern is that, or my question is that your organization, the BES, give out loans to, are they the different companies that has to do with waste and contamination in communities? And I'm trying to understand if the guidelines for these organizations, how does that help to eliminate the contamination in the various communities, and if it has anything to do with the environmental justice groups that are working in the communities to supply information to the communities and then back to Department of Toxic Substance Control, the Board of Environmental Safety. I might not have said that exactly right, but yes, that's my question or concern.
I can take a crack at that one. Thanks so much, Levon, for your question. I guess just a couple points in response. What we're talking about here is not so much loans. This is actually kind of the opposite. This is the fee rates that the various regulated industry or entities here would have to pay into DTSC. The second point, your question on kind of how this impacts environmental justice considerations. Really what we're talking about here is the revenues that are coming into DTSC that allow DTSC then to do its work on various environmental justice issues, cleanups, et cetera. So this is the money in, and then of course the critical work that DTSC does is the money out. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. I really understand that. And this is a large state, and we have a lot of problems concerning concerning that. So if a company does not agree with the fees that they have to pay, or say that it's too much or whatever, how does that affect the safety issues?
I can maybe take a first stab at answering that question. So for any of our fees, they are required under law, under state law, to be paid. It's designated who is required to pay and how much, with the rates also, adjusted by the board every year, which, as the chair mentioned, is what this process is related to, is setting those fee rates. But if a fee payer is required to pay under the law and they don't pay, then there are penalties that can be assessed. And we work with the Department of Tax and Fee Administration, who is responsible for collecting those fees, and they do oversight on their end. They do audits, they do other things to make sure that those entities that are required to pay do in fact pay, and can charge penalties and interest for non-payment. And then some of the work that DTSC has been doing is working with CDTFA to also support that compliance work.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Levon. For questions today for our presenters, you can either submit it through the Q&A feature in Zoom, or you can raise your virtual hand on the Zoom application, or press *9 on your phone if you are calling in. And if you would like to submit a question anonymously but would like a response, you can always email us at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov. We'll make sure to set up, get a response to you if you want to ask either after the workshop or if you want to submit something anonymously. Okay, so do another call for any on the Q&A, or again, you can raise your virtual hand on the Zoom application or press *9 on your phone. I'm not seeing additional questions right now through the Q&A, but we'll give it another moment. Okay. Any other additional questions? Well, we have the pros here. Okay, last call for questions through the workshop, I should say. Of course, we will still be continuing talking about this process. We're going to get updated data and information over the next few weeks. So this will be an ongoing process, and we'll be talking about it at our July 15th board meeting, our August board meeting. So there'll definitely be additional opportunities for questions and comments. But not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A or other additional hands being raised, I think we're going to go ahead and conclude the Q&A portion. If we didn't get to your question, or if something comes up later today that you want to make sure that you share with us or ask us about as we start this process, you can email us at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put our contact information and additional resources slide back up to share with folks, slide 29. And this will have additional resources to look at, especially as we go through this process, and make our considerations moving forward. So if you have any questions regarding the information shared today, the contact information is provided on the screen on your Zoom screen. I would like to thank our presenters for sharing all of the information and everything that you're able to share at this time, the context, the resources, the considerations, things that the fee subcommittee is going to be looking at, was really helpful to give us an idea of what this process would look like. I would also like to thank our California State University Sacramento Zoom facilitators, Corin Chopin and Danessa Quintos. Thank you for joining us on that. So as a reminder, as Linda Ocampo shared with us earlier, the board's fee subcommittee will present the recommendations for the environmental fee, facility fee, and generation and handling fee for fiscal year 25-26 at our July 15th board meeting. This meeting will be held at the Cal EPA headquarters building in Sacramento, but you can also join us in person or via Zoom, where you'll have another opportunity to share comments with the board. Please feel free to reach out to us with your questions, comments, or concerns as we navigate this process. And we appreciate your time today and look forward to engaging with you soon. Thank you all for joining, and we'll be posting this workshop on our website within the coming weeks. Thank you all.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Thank you.